Here's something most men learn too late. Attraction doesn't blind you. It negotiates with you. It convinces you to tolerate what you'd normally walk away from. It reframes warning signs as misunderstandings. And slowly, your standards become flexible while your instincts get quieter. That's not romance. That's conditioning. There are 3 major red flags in a woman that reveal when a relationship is moving away from mutual respect and toward emotional control. They don't show up as obvious toxicity. They show up as patterns. Patterns that make you manage emotions, explain yourself excessively, and second-guess your own reality. This video isn't about fear or blame. It's about clarity. Because once you understand these signs, you stop losing power without knowing where it went. You didn't miss the signs. You negotiated with them. That's the part most men don't want to admit. Because it feels better to believe you were blindsided than to accept that you saw something early and talked yourself out of it. Here's what actually happens. Attraction doesn't shut off your intelligence. It reroutes it. When a woman triggers desire, chemistry, or emotional attachment, your mind starts working for the feeling instead of for the truth. You stop asking, is this healthy? And start asking, how do I make this work? That's not love. That's bias. Hope bias tells you she'll change once she feels secure. Scarcity mindset whispers that women like her don't come around often, and ego fills in the gaps by telling you that you can handle what other men couldn't. So when your gut tightens, you don't listen. You reinterpret. You soften the warning. You downgrade the threat. She didn't mean it like that. It was just a bad day. She's been through a lot, and slowly, without realizing it, you train yourself to distrust your own instincts. This is where men lose leverage. Not because the red flags disappear, but because they stop being treated as signals. They become inconveniences, things you work around instead of information you act on. Understand this clearly. Red flags don't fade with patience. They don't soften with consistency. They don't disappear because you show up better. What they do is embed themselves deeper into the dynamic until leaving feels harder than staying. Before we talk about specific behaviors, you need this reset. You are not here to diagnose her. You're here to protect yourself. And the moment you start explaining away what you feel instead of observing it, control has already started slipping. That's the lens you need before we go any further. Number 1, she weaponizes your emotions, and it almost always starts the same way, quietly, gently, disguised as connection. You open up because it feels right. She listens closely. She asks the right questions. She looks present, empathetic, even supportive. And in that moment, you tell yourself, this feels safe. You mistake attentiveness for trustworthiness. That's the trap. Men are taught that emotional openness creates intimacy. And that's true, with the right person. But intimacy and safety are not the same thing. One creates closeness. The other determines whether what you reveal will ever be used against you. Here's what most men don't realize. Emotional disclosure is information. It reveals where you doubt yourself, where you feel shame, where your confidence thins out. In healthy hands, that information is protected. In unhealthy hands, it becomes leverage. And the danger isn't obvious at first. She doesn't react negatively. She doesn't judge you openly. In fact, she may respond with reassurance. That's what lowers your guard. That's what convinces you to keep talking, to go deeper, to reveal more. But pay attention to how she listens. Is she holding space, or is she cataloging? Is she understanding, or is she learning where you're exposed? Not everyone who listens to your pain is safe with it. A woman who later weaponizes your emotions doesn't do it accidentally. She learns first. She observes what matters to you, what hurts you, what you're afraid of becoming. And when that information is stored, it changes the power balance. Because now, in moments of tension, she knows exactly where to press. This is where men confuse vulnerability with strength. Vulnerability without discernment isn't courage. it's risk. And when you give emotional access to someone who hasn't proven emotional restraint, you hand them something far more valuable than affection. You hand them influence. If you've ever felt that tightening in your chest after opening up, if part of you wondered whether you'd said too much, that wasn't insecurity. That was intuition, flagging an imbalance before your mind caught up. And ignoring that feeling is how this red flag takes root. It doesn't happen immediately, and that's why it works. At first, nothing feels wrong. Arguments feel normal. Disagreements seem manageable. But then one day, something shifts. You're in the middle of tension. Maybe your voice is calm. Maybe you're trying to explain yourself, and suddenly she reaches for something you never expected to hear again. Something you trusted her with. A fear. A past failure. A moment you admitted you weren't proud of. She doesn't scream it. She doesn't dramatize it. She drops it casually, almost surgically. And the effect is instant. Your focus disappears. Your confidence collapses inward. The conversation stops being about the issue and becomes about defending your worth. That's emotional weaponization. And here's the pattern men miss. It escalates. The first time, it feels accidental. You tell yourself she was emotional, that she didn't mean it that way. The second time, it's more precise. The words hit closer to the core. By the third time, it's unmistakable. She knows exactly where it hurts, and she goes there when she wants control back. This isn't anger. This isn't poor communication. This is dominance through emotional exposure. Shame becomes the tool. Guilt becomes the leverage. And the moment you react, by shutting down, apologizing prematurely, or doubting yourself, the behavior is reinforced. Because now she knows it works. Men often ask the wrong question here. They ask, why would someone I care about do this? The better question is, what does she gain when I feel small? Power. Once your vulnerabilities are used against you, the dynamic changes permanently. You hesitate before speaking. You censor yourself. You stop being emotionally honest, not because you want to, but because you've learned honesty has consequences. And this is the most dangerous part. You start associating closeness with pain. So you pull back. You lose polarity. You lose presence. And then you're blamed for being distant, using the very wounds she created as proof that something is wrong with you. This is why this red flag is never minor. It doesn't just hurt your feelings. It reshapes how you show up as a man in the relationship. And once that line is crossed, it's rarely uncrossed. Once your emotions are used against you, the damage doesn't stay in the argument. It follows you afterward, into silence, into hesitation, into how you think before you speak. This is the psychological cost men underestimate. You begin to self-edit. Not because you're calm, but because you're cautious. You replay conversations in your head before they even happen. You weigh whether honesty is worth the fallout. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop showing up fully. Not as a strategy, as a survival response. That's emotional shutdown. And here's the part that matters. Emotional shutdown isn't neutrality. It's erosion. Your confidence thins out. Your decisiveness softens. Your presence loses weight. And the very traits that once created attraction, clarity, groundedness, certainty, start to fade. This is how control is maintained. A woman who weaponizes your emotions doesn't need to argue harder. She doesn't need to threaten. She only needs you to remember what happens when you speak freely. Once that memory is installed, you police yourself for her. Men often believe this behavior can be corrected with patience, reassurance, or deeper communication. It can't. Because this isn't a misunderstanding. It's a pattern of leverage. And leverage, once proven effective, is rarely surrendered voluntarily. Understand the distinction clearly. Healthy conflict challenges behavior. Emotional manipulation attacks identity. In healthy disagreement, you may feel frustrated, but you don't feel diminished. You don't feel ashamed for having feelings. You don't feel smaller afterward. When someone crosses into using your vulnerabilities as ammunition, the relationship stops being a partnership and becomes a hierarchy. And love cannot exist where emotional safety is conditional. This is why this red flag is non-negotiable, not because it's dramatic, but because it teaches you to doubt yourself. And a man who doubts himself becomes easier to guide, easier to guilt, easier to control. If you stay, the price isn't one argument. The price is who you become over time, and that's not something you should ever be asked to sacrifice. Number 2, she thrives on drama. And no, this isn't about strong emotions or being fiery. Drama is not passion. Drama is instability disguised as intensity. At first, it can even feel exciting. High emotions, big reactions, deep makeups after explosive arguments. It tricks you into believing the relationship has depth, that something meaningful is happening because everything feels amplified. But look closer. If every week brings a new crisis, if small issues spiral into emotional storms, if peace feels temporary but tension feels familiar, you're not in a relationship, you're inside a control loop. Drama creates chaos, and chaos shifts power. When emotions are constantly elevated, you're never grounded enough to think clearly. You're reacting instead of choosing, explaining instead of observing, apologizing instead of evaluating. That's the point. A woman who thrives on drama doesn't need to be right. She needs to be central. Conflict keeps attention focused on her emotional state. It keeps you on edge, adjusting your behavior, scanning for the next trigger. And when you're busy managing emotional fallout, you're not setting boundaries. Watch the patterns. She picks fights over minor delays. She reads threat into neutral actions. She escalates quickly, then later minimizes the explosion as just how she feels. Nothing ever resolves, because resolution would remove the leverage. Men often rationalize this by calling it stress, trauma, or passion. But here's the reality. Healthy people don't need constant emotional turbulence to feel connected. They don't manufacture intensity to feel alive. Drama is a substitute for inner stability. And the cost to you is cumulative. You start walking on eggshells. You anticipate reactions instead of acting freely. You lose the calm authority that grounds attraction. Over time, your nervous system stays activated, always bracing, never resting. That's not chemistry. That's exhaustion. And the longer you stay in that environment, the more chaos becomes normalized. Until one day, peace feels boring. And that's when you know the dynamic has already changed you. Here's what makes this dynamic especially dangerous. It's addictive. Not emotionally, in your biology. The relationship moves in cycles. Conflict erupts suddenly. Accusations fly. Tension spikes. Your nervous system floods with stress hormones. Then, just when it feels unbearable, the storm breaks. She softens. The connection returns. The relief feels intense, almost euphoric. That relief is what hooks you. Your body learns the pattern before your mind does. Chaos creates pain. Reconciliation creates reward. And without realizing it, your system starts craving the highs that follow the lows. Calm no longer feels satisfying. It feels empty, boring, uncertain. This is how men stay stuck. You start confusing emotional intensity with emotional depth. You mistake volatility for passion. And because the reconciliation feels so good, you unconsciously tolerate behavior that would have been unacceptable in a stable state of mind. That's not love. That's conditioning. And here's the truth most men don't want to hear. A woman who thrives on drama isn't afraid of losing you. She's afraid of losing control over your emotional state. Chaos keeps you reactive. Peace would give you space to think. And thinking breaks the spell. That's why calm moments rarely last. Just when things settle, something gets stirred up. A comment, a suspicion, a mood shift. Not always consciously, but predictably. Men often believe they're staying because they care. In reality, they're staying because their nervous system has been trained to associate tension with connection. The ego gets involved too. You want to believe you can stabilize her, that your presence can anchor the relationship. That belief keeps you invested even as the cost rises. But look at the outcome. You become hyper-aware. You over-explain. You manage emotions that aren't yours to manage. And slowly, your sense of internal authority erodes. You're no longer leading, you're maintaining. This is the moment you need clarity. Relationships are not supposed to feel like emotional whiplash. Stability isn't the enemy of attraction. It's the foundation of respect. And if someone needs chaos to feel powerful, peace will always threaten them. Number 3. She can't apologize. And this one is often misunderstood, especially by men who value peace. At first, it looks like confidence. She's firm, unyielding, certain. She doesn't back down easily. And part of you interprets that as strength. You tell yourself she's just not the type to say sorry, that it's her personality, that it's not worth turning into a bigger issue. But the refusal to apologize isn't about confidence. It's about ego protection. An apology requires vulnerability. It requires the ability to tolerate discomfort without shifting blame. And when someone cannot do that, when every conflict ends with deflection, justification, or reversal, it reveals a lack of emotional maturity, not independence. Watch the pattern closely. You bring up a concern calmly. Somehow, the conversation pivots. Suddenly, you're defending your tone, then your timing, then your intentions. Before you know it, you're the one trying to restore peace, while the original issue quietly disappears. This is accountability avoidance. And over time, it trains you into a familiar role. You become the one who smooths things over, who compromises first, who apologizes just to end the tension, even when you weren't wrong. Not because you agree, but because you're tired. That's not harmony. That's imbalance. When someone can't apologize, they're telling you something important. Preserving their self-image matters more than repairing the relationship. Their pride comes before your experience, and that creates a silent hierarchy where one person adapts and the other never has to. This dynamic erodes respect from both sides. You start feeling unheard, unvalued, careful, and the more you suppress your needs to keep things calm, the more resentment builds beneath the surface. Healthy relationships don't avoid mistakes, they correct them. They rely on mutual responsibility, not emotional stubbornness. And when accountability is missing, growth stops. The relationship becomes static, defensive, and fragile. Because without the ability to say, "I was wrong," there is no path forward, only repetition. When a woman can't apologize, the damage doesn't show up all at once. It accumulates quietly, like pressure building behind a wall. At first, you adapt. You tell yourself it's easier to let things go. You choose peace over friction. You learn which topics to avoid, which reactions to soften, which truths to swallow. Not because you agree, but because you already know how the conversation will end. You walking on eggshells becomes normal. Every disagreement follows the same script. You raise a concern. She deflects. You explain yourself. She reframes. You apologize, not for being wrong, but for wanting resolution. And in that moment, something subtle shifts. You give up ground, not intentionally, but consistently. This is how resentment is born. Because the issue was never resolved. It was buried. And buried issues don't disappear. They sit beneath the surface, stacking on top of each other, slowly changing how you feel toward the person standing in front of you. Attraction thins out. Respect erodes. Connection becomes performative instead of real. And here's the part most men miss. When accountability is missing, trust collapses next. You stop believing problems can be solved. You stop believing your experience matters. You stop believing the relationship is a place where truth is welcome. So you withdraw, not dramatically, but internally. You become less invested, less expressive, less present. Then you're told you've changed. But you didn't change. You adapted to an environment where responsibility only flowed one way. Now imagine the future. Bigger challenges, financial stress, family decisions, real consequences. If she can't own small mistakes now, what happens when the stakes are higher? Every serious issue becomes a battle, not to find solutions, but to avoid blame. That's not partnership. That's emotional gridlock. A relationship without accountability doesn't grow. It stagnates. And stagnation always turns toxic eventually, because unresolved tension has only one direction to go. This is why this red flag isn't about words. It's about whether the relationship has a future that isn't built on you shrinking to keep it intact. Now step back and look at the pattern. These 3 red flags may look different on the surface, but underneath, they all grow from the same root. Control. Weaponizing your emotions takes control over how safe you feel being yourself. Thriving on drama takes control over your emotional state and attention. Refusing to apologize takes control over accountability and reality itself. Different tactics. Same objective. And this is where many men get confused. They think attraction is the problem. They think chemistry clouds judgment. But attraction isn't the enemy. Misplaced respect is. The moment you start valuing intensity over stability, access over accountability, connection over character, you trade short-term emotion for long-term cost. Understand this clearly. A woman who genuinely respects you does not need to control you. She doesn't need to destabilize you to feel secure. She doesn't need to shrink you to feel powerful. Control only enters when insecurity meets opportunity. That's why these red flags often appear once emotional access is granted. Once she knows you care. Once you're invested. Once the leverage exists. And if you're not paying attention, the shift feels subtle. You don't feel dominated. You feel responsible. Responsible for her moods. Responsible for keeping the peace. Responsible for fixing what you didn't break. That's how control hides. It disguises itself as closeness. The real distinction you need to make isn't between good women and bad women. It's between dynamics that build mutual respect and dynamics that quietly drain it. Attraction can coexist with respect. Chemistry can exist without chaos. Vulnerability can exist without punishment. But only when control isn't the currency of the relationship. If you take nothing else from this, take this insight. The right woman doesn't require you to lose yourself to keep her. She doesn't need your confusion, your guilt, or your silence to stay connected. And the moment a relationship demands those things, it's no longer asking for love, it's asking for submission. And that's the line you should never cross. Here's the bottom line, and it's uncomfortable for some men to hear. Strength in relationships is not measured by how much you tolerate. It's measured by how clearly you recognize when something is costing you your self-respect. The men who lose themselves aren't the ones who love deeply. They're the ones who stay when the price of staying is silence, confusion, and constant self-adjustment. Those 3 red flags we just broke down aren't about personality quirks. They're about direction. They point to where the relationship is heading if nothing changes. Toward less safety, less clarity, less of you. And no, walking away doesn't make you cold. It makes you honest. You don't need to become guarded. You don't need to harden your heart. You don't need to distrust women. What you need is discernment. The ability to observe behavior without negotiating with your instincts. The courage to choose peace over intensity. Respect over attachment. The right woman will not require you to shrink, second-guess yourself, or manage emotions that aren't yours. She won't punish honesty. She won't need chaos to feel close. And she won't protect her ego at the expense of the relationship. That kind of connection exists, but only for men who are willing to walk away from what feels good when it's costing them who they are. If this resonated with you, subscribe. Not casually, but intentionally. This channel is about clarity, leverage, and self-respect in modern relationships. Like this video if you value truth over comfort. And comment below, which of these red flags have you ignored in the past? Share this with a man who's confused right now, not to scare him, but to wake him up. Because the moment you stop ignoring what you feel, you stop giving your power away.